Greetings. This is James Gilliland with As You Wish Talk Radio. And for the news, I want to get into some ancient history. And I've got Matthew LaCroix. He's going to be our next guest. And he's a passionate researcher who grew up in the outdoors of northern New England. From an early age, a strong connection back to nature was established and built into the morals of his life. His persistent yearning for adventure led him to profound life-changing experiences that inspired him to write for local and national magazines such as Backpacker and AMC Outdoors. While attending Plymouth State University, he published his first book at the age of 22 and began studying history, philosophy, quantum mechanics, superstring theory. His focus became uncovering and connecting the esoteric teachings from secret societies and ancient cultures that disappeared long ago in our past. At 32, he published his second book, The Illusion of Us, or US, I don't know, which has combined years of research to discover the truth about history, human origins, as well as fundamentals of consciousness. In 2019, he will be released his third book entitled The Stage of Time, which represents a compilation of ancient writings and theoretical physics in order to answer some of our most difficult questions, from understanding the complexities of reality to lost history, the identity of the gods of antiquity. No stone is left unturned in the endless pursuit of truth. So with any further ado, I want to welcome Matthew to the show. Matthew, are you with us?
Hey, it's great to be here. Thanks.
Hey, you're right up my line. I mean, I love this stuff. I've been delving into it. I had to delve into the ancient history because I was having experiences with these beings. And after the experiences, I had to go research it to find out who they were and what they're all about. So I was always saying somebody should write a history book, the real history of Earth, pre-Diluvian and beyond that, because, according to Michael Cremo's work, it goes back something like 600 million years. Advanced humans were walking the earth, and you've got boot footprints crushing trilobites and things like that. So I know you've done a lot on this, and with the work that you're putting out now, I think it should be standard curriculum in any university.
Yeah, I mean, I completely agree. It's one of the things I really try to hammer on in my work in the newest book is the fact that we have to completely change the educational paradigm that's been created here around this doctrine that we're being taught, because we're not being given an accurate viewpoint of, not only just human history, but what actually has been occurring throughout the past on this planet for, at least the last couple 100,000 years.
Mm-hmm. Now, how far back have you gone with let's say advanced humans being on the Earth? Because I've always told people that the Earth is a series of colonies, one after the other, and most of them had to start over because of massive earthquakes, tsunamis, volcanic eruptions, pole shifts, things of that nature. Where whatever mix of genetics was left had to start over as primitives. And does that follow along the same lines as your research?
Yeah, and one of the things that I make sure that I try to always strictly follow is there's a lot of stuff that floats around the internet. There's a lot of information that people say came from somewhere, but I try to only focus on things that I can actually find evidence for. And I know that becomes very difficult because over time so many things disappear. But I try not to delve into areas where there's not enough for me to be solidly understanding, some of the facts. Like, for instance, I don't really go further back than Atlantis and Lemuria because I don't have enough to go by to be able to accurately represent it. But I don't deny the fact that so much has happened in our history, at least the last couple 100,000 years, of some kind of, visitation and some kind of tampering with the natural balance that was already here. And I absolutely agree that it's been this rise and fall of civilizations throughout its history.
Yeah, I agree. If you talk to most of the ancient cultures, especially the shamans and medicine men or the elders, they seem to all point to the Pleiades, and they mention the Pleiades. Some point to other systems, but as the origins, and they even talk about how the Pleiadians actually established Atlantis and Lemuria or Mu, and And so it's have you done some research in that area?
Yeah, absolutely. So when I'm looking into things like, who are the Anunnaki in terms of where they come from? Because that's the easiest place that we can start looking in terms of knowing that we have visitation from some advanced sentient being. And so what I come up with looking at a lot of the different things that come out of, like the fact that the Dogon with the Nomo, who we know are just the Anunnaki, how they extensively discuss Sirius and the Sirius system itself. And then like you said, the Hopi and a lot of other ancient civilizations talk about the Pleiadians. And so the thing that I tend to look at is the fact that I believe that the Pleiadians may just be a branch, a group of these with what we call the Anunnaki, which they call themselves the Anunna. So I absolutely see a lot of evidence for visitation from advanced hominid beings like the Pleiadians, who came here, I believe, long before what we consider the Anunnaki arrival in terms of the unbalance. And I think that when we look around our world and we look at the millions and millions of different species that inhabit almost every single crack and corner of this planet, that all seem to be so perfectly adapted for their environments, I go with a completely non-Darwinian approach, and I see this world as more so the Pleiadian teaching way, in terms of the way that the perspective that they give us from some of the information we have is that it's this DNA library of life here, and we don't even know where some of these species could have come from. Is Earth just a compilation of species that could have come from all over the galaxy? We don't know, because a lot of us are stuck here with this Darwinian paradigm that everything came from one single source and then created this massive multitude of variety that is, to me, completely impossible. And so that's where I see the Pleiadian teachings really becoming valuable, because they talk about how this was this balanced paradise of life here. And, when long ago, when some of these beings arrived here, they completely disrupted and took over this realm. And a lot of that perfection was lost. And so we're trying to get out of that darkness right now, I believe.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, according to some of the Lakota elders and the Cherokee elders I've talked to, and they talk about ancient times, and also too, the same information is coming through Australia. Some of I don't know if you've met Brendan Murray. He's the chief of the Raven tribe, and he represents several other tribes, and he has the ancient wisdom too. But they have it. Are you familiar with Gosford Glyphs? Have you been out there yet?
No, I have not.
Oh, you got to see it, because they've tried to destroy this site for quite some time. They were going to use it as a bombing range, and they've done everything they can to destroy it and discredit it. But the problem with it is it has the whole history of Earth written in stone since the beginning of time. And it shows these ships landing. It shows DNA patterns, and then it shows the Denisovian man, the ancient man there at the time. And it has the merge of the genetics and everything, and it tells about all these different epochs, and Atlantis, Lemuria, when the Egyptians came back to get the knowledge, to get the knowledge, because they had a fall and they lost the ancient knowledge.
Yeah.
They came back and they tried to get the knowledge, and the elders there said, no, you can't take it with you. It needs to be here, stay here. And two pharaohs, and one of them got bitten by a snake and died, and the other one was shipwrecked and died. And they tried to steal the knowledge and take it back, but everything is there. It's all recorded in stone. And you look at it, and I just went, oh my God, the things that I've studied, the things that I intuitively felt were correct, the information I've been getting from the higher dimensions is all sitting here right in front of me, written in stone. And they brought Egyptologists out and some other people that are very, good at describing or deciphering hieroglyphs and petroglyphs and things like that. And they said they could decipher these, and it was amazing. The whole story is right there.
Yeah, I completely agree. I actually am writing in the newest about the Aboriginal tribes of Australia and how they predate some of the oldest civilizations on the planet. And like I say, if a civilization has extensive knowledge about the flood itself and before the flood, it means that they were around before the flood. And we're talking about the Antediluvian time period. We're talking about, yes, and I think so. The Aboriginals of Australia, looking at the pre-Inca, looking at a lot of the early Mesopotamians and the pre-Egyptians, which they were called the Kemet or the land of Kem. These are all ancient civilizations that predate the flood. That, like you said, they were part of this golden age of civilization when it was a time when the knowledge of advanced wisdom, the understanding of how to ascend human energy, the understanding of how to manipulate the energy of the planet. All of those things have been lost, but they were once shared by these cultures all around the world, including some of those that were in Australia.
Yeah, and it shows, what they say is the Aboriginal are the original people. They're probably the original hybrids that were created, and that's what their information goes back to. And they talk about Uluru and the Katajuda and all those places. They said those stones came from the Pleiades supposedly, and were sent to the earth to seed the earth. But they have some really interesting stories when you talk about them, and sitting with these elders and hanging out. And I'm sitting there and I was telling my research, and he was telling me his ancient stories, and they're all fitting in together. And while we're sitting there talking, this big ship flies right over our heads, and we got it on film. It's pretty hilarious. But we did a ECETI Down Under documentary on all this stuff. But it was crazy. I mean, the ravens came, thousands of ravens came and just circled us and landed in all the trees. There were so many events that happened there. You just couldn't wrap your head around it. There's no explaining what went on that whole trip.
Wow, that sounds exciting. I think that, humanity here has a very limited perspective of what actually exists around us, and I think we're largely in a quarantine of consciousness and understanding because of the primitive, violent nature that we're being kept in. And so I think, that the truth of all that exists around us is largely being kept away from us. And furthermore, our perceptions are so limited within the visible light spectrum. Like you were saying, a lot of your other shows talking about all the ways that human energy is suppressed and kept in a lower state in order to prevent someone from actually being able to be consciously aware. And I think that's one of the main ways where the main reasons why we, because of our limited perceptions, so much may be happening around us that we can't even perceive. And it's almost like it doesn't exist.
Yeah, I agree. The thing about with everything, they say you actually see with your brain. Your eyes are picking up billions of bits of information, and you see with your brain. If you're totally programmed, you're not going to see any of these things, and unless you expand your consciousness and get a much larger database, a lot of these things are just going to be shoved aside or not experienced. And I've seen that happen again and again. And their story is that there was 12 major star nations involved in seeding the earth, and it goes along with what you were saying earlier, is that the DNA, both plant and animal and human DNA, is so diverse. There's no way it could have developed here through random mutation in the amount of time that it would take for that to happen. So, look at the facts, and all of us have Aboriginal DNA in us. All of us do. It's amazing when they did the genome experiment. They're going, wait a second, everybody here has Aboriginal DNA, and they're finding the Aboriginal people everywhere, little pockets of them all over the planet. So it is kind of interesting, looking at that probably was, and from my understanding, the ancient Illyrians were the first ones here. They're very tall, very large people, and the other colonies, the Pleiades, the Orion system, and other systems that they colonized were of that same root race, and then the Pleiadians were the Lyrians were their ancient ancestors, but they actually became smaller because they adjusted to the planet that they were evolving on. And, it kind of makes sense when you think about it. But, yeah, definitely. Yeah, we need to, I think it's so important that we need to really get the true history of Earth and incorporate, the star nations, our ancestors, our true ancestors in there. And also with that understanding, it's going to help us understand our true nature and, again, make our own personal connection with Source, whatever you want to call it. But I think we've been so manipulated and psychically damaged, with all of these beings coming here and passing themselves off as gods and things of that nature, and acting in a very jealous, wrathful, tyrannical way. I mean, they were evolved beings, but they were spiritually backwards, in the way they behaved. But it's like my understanding of the Anunnaki, there were the fallen Anunnaki, and they're the ones that continued to evolve and are extremely advanced beings that live under universal law. So there's always two sides. We can't, I hear one thing that the Anunnaki are all reptilian, and I go, well, they were the bearded gods.
That's right.
Yeah, they weren't reptilian, but although Marduk did make a pact with the reptilians for total supremacy of the earth and went against his own people, so I get that's how they tie that together. But there's so much misinformation out there coming from I would say a victim consciousness rather than an unbiased researcher consciousness. It's hard to sift through all this stuff, and I think it would be really good to do what you're doing, is just lay out the facts, lay out the research. This is what happened, and stop adding all the other stuff in there that can't be defined, or there's no evidence.
Yeah, I try to make sure I follow, like you said, we have many, many depictions showing them, at least during that time period in that incarnation, and they're very, very tall, long bearded men in most cases, because they're mostly a masculine society. There are women, but the majority of them are male. And I think you hit on a lot of good points there when you were talking about it. Is we're talking about ascended, advanced beings who this whole term fallen back to Earth. This is representing them becoming morally corrupted and being banished basically into our realm, and not being able to be allowed to be. Where is heaven? Heaven is just higher dimensions. It's existing in higher dimensional planes where, what we perceive around us is extremely limited to almost always the third dimension, unless you're some, yogi master or someone that spends a lot of time in meditation or goes, has their conscious level sitting up in the fourth and fifth dimension. Most people here on the planet are strictly within the third dimension. So it's this battle over what state of human energy will people be kept in, and it's gone back to the very beginning of time. And I want to point out, I think one of the reasons why the Anunnaki are often associated with reptilians is because of the idea of the ancient reptilian brain, the masculine left brain. It's kind of a play on describing the fact that you have this unbalance that took over and corrupted them. So then you could use that term to describe the state of what they became. If you lose your complete, right brain, your empathetic side, you're going to completely become disconnected to morality and the higher decision making, and then you become corrupted by your demiurges and your lower state. And so I think what we're seeing is this division that arose between these beings long ago over the fact that it seems to all have derived. If you read the Atrahasis, if you read Tablet 6 of the Enuma Elish, if you read countless other stories that describe this, they basically say the same thing. They say that the early mankind, there was a lot of names, Lulu, One of the names that was given, one of the early humans was Adamu, Adam. A lot of these names that have been then turned into some myth or some religious doctrine, they have origins, and the origins stem from the fact that these tablets clearly state, in these stories, like you were saying, from the Aboriginals all the way across to the Hopi, they clearly state that there was this primitive human on the earth, probably a combination of the Neanderthal and the Denisovian. And at one point, these beings came to this world, this realm we have here, and they found biological diversity covering the entire planet, this perfect harmony that existed. And if you look at the Gnostics, they're one of my favorite sides that describe this, because they talk about how these beings that call themselves the Anunna, who the Sumerians then called the Anunnaki, they brought with them what's called duality. They brought with them war, chaos, and negative energy, and they completely threw off the balance that existed here. And one of the first things they did was they took over this realm, meaning they took over both the physical planet and they took over the energy of the planet. And that's one of the reasons why I think we see this assigning of these beings into different places. Some went into the underworld, where, you know, these lower state of our planet, where the energies are controlled through both soul incarnation and the energy of the planet. And then you have beings that were then sent to higher dimensions, and then so they could fill all these gaps to take over basically this entire reality, to then manipulate and control it however they wanted. And so one of the problems they ran up against, the Atrahasis really talks about it well, is that the workers that they had that were called the Ajiji, these were workers that were doing a lot of physical labor, and the labor was mostly revolving around clearing channels from silt for agriculture, because they had to somehow feed people that were working on the planet. And they ran up against a problem because the Ajiji eventually revolted. And so they had to create this primitive worker, and that's where mankind came from. Now, this is where the problem arose, where the very beginning of all this started. And it comes from the fact that some of these beings, they felt like the Neanderthal and the Denisovian were just primitive beasts, okay? And they looked at their genetics and the state that they had reached, and they see themselves as, in some cases, even being more supreme than even this creative source of the universe. They almost wanted to become these masters of the entire universe in their domain. So that's what led to that. That's what led to their downfall, because they ended up becoming consumed by themselves. But the point is, when they found out that a worker needed to be created here, and this being Enki that we see everywhere, who was part of this designing of the human race, he gave us, along with the help of Ninmah, they gave us basically all the genetic gifts of these Anunnaki. Okay, so if you're an advanced being and you see yourself as this, powerful bloodline group race that should, is above everything else, if your genetics were then given to this primitive being in your eyes that then could potentially ascend in some point to become even greater than them, you could really see where that hatred and anger would start from. And that's exactly what happened. When these root races were created to be basically physical laborers on the earth, and they had to be compatible with these beings, that's how we know they're hominids. They're hominid based because it strictly says that they had to get a biological being here that was compatible with their DNA. And that's why primitive hominids were used. So so we get the first beings who were created, and it was essentially said that these first beings, like Adamu, were perfect. They were perfect in every single way, and it took a long time to get to that point. There was a lot of trial and error. There's a lot of things that happened where it was seen really it wasn't seen as very morale to a lot of those who have studied and looked at it. But eventually they created this perfect being who, due to a lot of this anger and jealousy, and you look at the Sumerian king list, how all these kings lived so long, it was determined that they wanted to basically downgrade the human genome so that people would both live less less time, and they would have all these gifts basically disconnected from us. And so that's where all of this arose from, and this divide between the Anunna was over one side who basically fell in love with their creation. I'm sure you've heard that before. They fell in love with their creation, and then the other side thought we were like abominations and wanted us wiped off the earth. And that's why it's so fascinating to read and like really pay attention to some of these really accurate translations. Look at George Smith and Stephanie Dalley. These are probably the best two translators, in my opinion, in the world for anything that comes out of Mesopotamia. All right, and they translated the Atrahasis and many others, and it extensively talks about how because some of these beings who were more malevolent, and didn't want human beings to ascend their energy, and they were in control of these different zodiacal time periods, they decided that it was in their best interest to, and this is right in the Atrahasis, they started with trying to starve the people. Okay, and then they tried to give them plagues to have them all be killed by disease and plagues and starvation, and it didn't work. Humans were still alive, and because they wanted to wipe out what they called an experiment. And so when that didn't happen, they decided, with the ability of what they could do, they decided to allow this massive catastrophe to occur on the earth so that they could wipe the entire what many of them saw was an unbalancedness of our planet, because there was these fallen on the planet, like these fallen angels they're called, meaning we had basically gods walking on the earth. We had their offspring, which are what we call the Nephilim, that's extensively mentioned in the book of Enoch and in the Bible. We have these Nephilim, which are just the offspring of humans and the Anunnaki. Okay, so we have all these things running around the planet. And so and we have humans that are living thousands of years. I know that might seem insane to some people, but again, please go look at the Sumerian king list. Look at some of how long some of these humans lived, like Atrahasis. Look at how long he lived. His name was Noah in the Bible. Okay, his name was also Ziusudra. They knew that they had to do something, so they basically reset everything in the hopes that they could wipe it out. But unfortunately, a few humans remained and survived these catastrophes by going underground and all these various things. Like, you might be aware that the Hopi even have right in their stories how they were only allowed to live through that because they were guided into caves by beings that they met. And so they're called the Ant People, actually.
Yeah. Noah, from my understanding, Noah was, Inky had a little hanky-panky with some village woman that he grew very fond of. So Noah was a hybrid. And they said when he was born, he glowed, and the village didn't know what to do with him. And I guess so they took him to Inky, and he said, it's a gift, it's a gift to your village, and he's a special one, take care of him. And from my understanding about this is that something about the humans were in awe of the gods, the Anunnaki or whatever, and they're very subjective in awe, very, very in loving, and admiration, and that energy or that openness allows you to receive, consciousness and energy from the source itself. You bypass the ego, which they were kind of locked in. And so some of these hybrids were actually going beyond, especially Enlil, which was a defeated general that wanted the experiment to be done with. And so he was so upset with that. Noah went beyond him in evolution. And so they're going, oh crap, we've created these beings and they're going beyond us, but I guess Enki was all for it. He just wanted all of his creations to excel and reach their highest potential. But that seems to be the split between, I think that's the origin of the jealous, wrathful God was Enlil and Enki, the all-loving, all-forgiving creator God and the jealous, wrathful God. And then we've had other beings play those roles ever since, again and again over time.
So, and one of the things that happened, and you see this in a lot of places if you look, especially in religious stories, and they talk about archangels and all these things, but one of the things that happened was between those who are considered fallen and those who are considered second generation. And I want people to really remember that. We have a situation where you have these older first generation or older generation Anunnaki who have been alive for potentially as hard as that is to wrap your head around, potentially more than 1 million years. We have to completely change our perspective for how long some beings could essentially live. But the point I'm trying to make is Enki had sons and Enlil had sons and daughters, and those offspring became what we think of as the second generation. Okay, Marduk you mentioned already. My research has identified several figures, especially Marduk. Others, sons, especially of Enlil, like Nergal and Ninurta. These are just offspring of some of these older generation gods who were given largely the dominion, or took it, of Earth, and which is one of the reasons why we had so much of this psychological altering of reality occur, where you see all this blood sacrifice, you see all this obsession over bloodlines, you see these fighting over different races on the planet. What do you think the whole war with the Aryan race of the Nazis versus the Jewish? That's about fighting over having one race dominate to wipe out another root race. We're talking about something that's been happening for thousands of years on this planet, where we perceive it as just, two armies are fighting. But why are they fighting? Why are they really fighting? Who's the great puppet master behind some of those armies, making them achieve certain goals, certain things? And so I see human beings largely have been used as puppets by a lot of these, especially lately, and especially during the time of Pisces, by a lot of these second generation gods who, because they were less experienced and because they potentially were less balanced, they have been one of the reasons why so much chaos has reigned at the time of Pisces. I mean, Aries was one thing. But look at Pisces. I mean, Pisces to me will probably go down as the darkest time in human history that we can think of, at least in terms of relatively modern human history.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree. I think to simplify it, basically, I think almost every religion has their bearded gods, and the bearded god that they refer to, which is the kind of the foundation of the religion, seems to align with the nature of that being or that bearded god. And so
exactly.
So you have that, it's like even in the Bible, the Old Testament, you have the jealous, wrathful, genocidal maniac guy,
Yahweh.
And then you have the New Testament, which is, you've got, the all-loving, all-forgiving God that Jesus brought the new covenant, supposedly. And you're going, well, wait a second. Either this guy's totally schizophrenic or there's two different beings here.
Exactly.
And two different beings interacting with humanity. And almost all the ancient books there's like complete, a contrary, information in them about the nature of God. You're going, wait a second, like, what are the rules here? Who is this guy here? The descriptions, everything are it's like bipolar, So the only way we're going to get through this is to know what happened, the real history of Earth and who these beings were and their natures, and then we can when we understand that and have the knowledge of that, we can go beyond it, actually.
Yes, and let me talk about that for a second. One of the things that's really fascinating was, you might say to yourself, well, when did spirituality, I'm not going to use the word religion, but when did spirituality become corrupted? That's the real question. And my research has shown that point in history was somewhere around when the Roman Empire was being transformed. Okay, so you had this physical Roman Empire that was going around conquering and by the way, destroying a lot of the ancient evidence, right, from around these ancient cultures around the world. And then you had this unsustainable collapse occur. And that's when you had this transition occur with what's called the Eastern Roman Empire, which is what today is now Turkey. Okay, this became the Byzantine Empire. Now, at this point, this is where a figure in history named Constantine, all right, he founded the city of Constantinople, the capital of Turkey at the time, and during that time period, they had this brilliant idea where instead of ruling the world through this physical war that's unsustainable, having to feed troops across massive lines of defense everywhere, right? They decided it would be a lot more effective to take over religion, to take over spirituality, and that's what they did. That's why Christianity, what it used to be based on, was Gnostic, ancient Gnostic in an Egyptian wisdom. And what they did is they took Christianity and they completely corrupted it after that time period, and they turned it into this worship of sacrifice and this, person on the altar who's going to save everybody here. But I wanted to go back to where I was a second ago, because so Constantine, he took, if you look at that time period, it's fundamentally amazing if people look at it. Before Constantine decided to take over Christianity for the Roman Empire, Christianity was actually illegal before that. So within only a couple years, it went from, if you were a Christian, you were hung or killed or stoned to death or whatever. And then a couple years later, after Constantine took over Christianity and adopted it as the official religion of the Romans in that area, if you were not a Christian, you were then killed. So it was this fundamental change that occurred, and that's a very important place to look at and study, because here you have, like you were saying, this connection back to this higher source, this perfect balance of higher energy where you become part of this collective that exists all throughout the universe, which is part of this perfect balance. And instead, our very means to achieve that, the guidelines for us to how to get to that point, how to live an honest life and to eat and drink a certain way and to interact a certain way so that our energy levels ascend and we become a certain kind of person. That was what spirituality was all about. It was a guide to how to help people reach higher states of energy and connect to this higher source. And they completely corrupted and took it over and turned it into these. And like you said, though, to be clear, it didn't really even just start there, because this Old Testament God, like you said, that was already evil. This is part of Enlil's corruption of the early versions of religion. But the point where the whole thing became corrupted, where it took this really dark path, where was during that Constantine transition, because then we saw this rise of the Abrahamic religions, especially Christianity, that then took over the world and corrupted a lot of the civilizations in the Americas and wiping them out, like the Aztec all the way down through the Inca. And so when I look at that, it makes me really sad, because so many people have then, and I'm not a religious person at all. I would call myself just a spiritual truther. But it comes down to, someone then will largely ignore that side completely, their spiritual side, because of how angry they are of what's happened in history. And you can't do that. If you want to reach higher states of energy, you have to follow all of these different points that bring us to our higher state of energy. You can't just have higher wisdom. You can't just be spiritual without wisdom and then try to have the two sides be disconnected to ascend. We have to take in all these different understandings of what these esoteric writings and the knowledge of our reality and our world, and combine them all to create this perspective that allows us to understand and to finally be able to ascend out of this this trap that they've created, where we're basically, living a very empty life, dying, and then having to just come back and do it all over again.
Well, I see, a simplest way of looking at this, what I see they've done is, one, they created an external God with themselves as the go-between. Yeah. You come to us and we'll tell you what God's got going on. And then, and then they took away personal responsibility of you making your own personal connection with Source, and taking responsibility for your actions and attitudes and emotions and what you're creating around you. And then on top of that, they laid in a big smattering of fear, guilt, and unworthiness. You're unworthy of talking to God. You're a sinner. You're guilty. you should fear God, all that stuff. That all has a frequency to it and a consciousness. It keeps you buried at a level of consciousness. And the truth of the matter is that, you've never been judged. God doesn't even have an ego. It's not male. It's not female. It's just pure consciousness and energy. And its most unlimited understanding. It's just pure unconditional love and joy and bliss. All these other images and beings are lesser gods or demigods, whatever you want to call them. But all the masters have been telling us that the temple is within, that God is within, and we all need to make our own personal connection with Source, or whatever name you want to give it. And they seem to miss all those teachings. And the main teaching is God is love, So what is all this other stuff going on? It's kind of weird. And it's really interesting too, is now the Pope, basically is coming out and saying the God of the Catholic Church is Lucifer, and he's got this giant reptilian throne he sits upon, and they just built a giant temple that looks like a snake, and you're just going, who are these guys? And on top of that, all the teenage immigrants are now under the auspices of the Catholic Church.
Yes, and you brought up a good point. I have a lot of people send me these questions. They say to me, okay, so if Enlil, who historically has this symbol of the eagle phoenix, where it's this masculine energy of war, right? If that's the case, then why do we have all this serpent stuff in the Vatican, this reptilian stuff? Well, to me, that's a direct consequence of, in many ways, during the time of Pisces, Marduk taking over Christianity. Okay? Yeah. Taking over the Catholic Church and becoming their puppet behind it. And I think a lot of the blood sacrifice stuff we see, go look at the mock black sacrifice stuff at Bohemian Grove, followed by, all these elite families and secret societies that have attended for years and years and years. I mean, you can't explain that with the understanding that none of this is real and it's just human beings here that are doing all this. Then why are they doing all these sacrifices to all these gods and following all these ancient rituals and all these things? Because they know it's real, and they're basically paying homage of their energy to these really malevolent beings that have caused so much chaos. And to them, they're all Marduk is a very complicated. I would even go as far to say that has the most complicated history of any of these beings of all, because he switched sides of duality multiple times, where he's played this Amun-Ra role in Egypt, which I believe is definitely connected to Horus. You see this Amun-Ra Egypt knowledge thing. Look at the Book of Ra, where there was all this knowledge of the third eye and understanding higher states, and then all of a sudden comes back to be this really sort of deceitful being during the time after the Roman Empire of Christianity, where he played the role of this savior that wanted to free mankind, but was really just deceiving him to worship him. And that's why you see a correlation between, Amun and Amen, Amen, yeah, when you're paying homage to Marduk. So I believe that he is definitely have a strong connection towards this figure of Lucifer and this perception of being this teacher and a savior, but you're really being more of a deceiver. Yeah.
I always tell people, if you want to know who's who, you can break it down really simple. Ask, are they creating heaven on earth? It's so simple. And are they operating under universal law, which is universal peace, brother, sisterly love, and individual freedom and prosperity for everybody? It's unity consciousness. If they're not operating within that framework, you might say, then they're working for somebody else.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's not a religion. That's just basic universal law. It's basic, these are principles necessary, for evolution to continue, for a healthy society and environment, basically. And it's really that simple, by their deeds or by their fruits you'll know them. So I'm just saying, the more you look at universal law and you see how far we've strayed away from it on every level, religious, business, political institutions, everything. I look at all this and I go, how is this fixable? How do you even fix this? And then you kind of wonder, well, maybe that's what pole shifts are all about. Maybe.
Well, let me speak about that for a minute. I want people to envision for a minute that they know nothing about their lives here at all. Just imagine the state that we really are, right? We're these advanced beings that have our chakra centers of our energy are perfectly tuned to the visible light spectrum because we're supposed to ascend, right? To become these non-physical advanced beings like many say the Pleiadians are, right? Are we just turning into the Pleiadians? Do we have some kind of a connection that may transverse like even the past and the present? There's a lot of really interesting stuff behind if you look at that. But the point I'm trying to make is think of yourself as an advanced being where you're all about balance and providing, wisdom and knowledge to others and helping others assist and grow. And you're visiting the planet for the first time. You travel here and you get here and you observe and you walk around and you look at the state of our reality. Having said what I just said, what we really are, not this Darwinian ape that still has all these primitive demiurges that they're just trying to get over. And that's why there's war all over the planet. Ignore that completely. Have that be completely out of the equation. And now just look at our world. Look at all of the war and suffering and murder and endless misery on our planet. People that have nothing they can look forward to in their life. They work, they come home, they have this empty life and they literally go to their grave depressed and sad. Whereas on the flip side, there's it's almost like two realities are existing here at the exact same time, where on the other side, there are people that have discovered, those people they observe. There's people that they then see who have discovered this and they're living, this completely different reality where they're trying to teach others wisdom. They're trying to help others, encourage others all around them. They're, they're not promoting war. They're helping their neighbors and the people around them. You see this completely different confliction in our reality where what it comes down to is this conditioning of how can you, over thousands of years, how can you condition reality so that those who are part of it don't even realize that they're part of a prison. And that's a paraphrase, comes from a great quote from Barbara Marciniak, but basically it's the idea of if you had this artificial reality created here, and that doesn't mean that everything we see around us is like this, it's not real and it's some kind of computer program. That's not what I mean. I mean a designed reality subconsciously created so that we don't understand our purpose and we don't understand our connection with the world around us, so that we become completely unbalanced and therefore we become controlled, not necessarily just in a physical way, but being controlled mentally to the point where you look at this, the analogy of Plato's cave, where you had this entire world of people who are being forced to stare at these shadows on the wall and kept in their lowest state of fear, their lowest state of energy, so that they can't ever get out. So they're stuck. And then I like to always talk about how, those people that get out of Plato's cave, that then come out of this cave and they're in the light and they see this bright reality all around them that's completely different than what they've been told. This moment in time, which is where I believe we're at right now, this moment where people on the outside that have broken away and then have discovered the truth, they then have to decide if they want to go back into that cave to save everybody else. Are they just going to stay out in bliss and in ignorance? Are they going to ignore all the other people and just stay in their own happy little life and say, well, I had a really crappy life. It was really hard to get here. It took me a long time to learn all this, and I finally got here and it was really difficult, so I'm not going to share with anybody else? Or are they going to realize that once you do get to that point, you become a teacher, and it's your obligation to then go help as many others out of that cave as possible? Yeah, some aren't going to believe you. They're going to think you're crazy. But anybody who didn't have the right information and has been conditioned and driven into a false understanding of our reality, they're going to fight this alternate side. And And we have to basically save who we can. You know, everybody's not going to be everyone's not ready. Some people are just going to be stuck in their paradigm of believing this, you know, this given, narrative that we've been told, and they're going to go along with it because in the end, it's very difficult to change a person's perspective about reality. In most cases, people's subconscious will attack it because it's very troubling to try to tell someone that everything that they've believed in their life and revolved around is not real. And that, you know, I'm sorry, but, you know, hey, you spent all this money on becoming whatever this profession is and you hate it. Did you just waste your life just because you were told to do it? So we're reached at this critical point right now when these paradigms that have been created here, okay, during the different zodiacs, Pisces became very negative. It was ruled by a combination of Marduk and Enlil, and they controlled it through deceiving that it was going to be a positive age and end up being a very negative age, which is difficult because we're part of that still. But we're right now we're at that point where this is the darkness before the dawn, because we're just about to carry over into the time of Aquarius and reach our galactic center, when the Mayans knew that human consciousness was going to reach the highest state possible, when all these paradigms would be torn away and you'd have two realities that would exist at the same time. And one of those realities is going to have to go away. And so the question becomes is how, you know, a lot of these people, these truthers say, what do I matter? What is go telling a couple people matter or trying to help a couple people? We're all part of this. We're like the soldiers of the dawn, that if we don't fight during this time, it may slip away and we may never be able to make it to the next zodiac. I mean, look at the evil that controls our world still. Look at the manipulation they want to do to create the next war. They're not stopping. And so we have to continue.
Yeah, I agree. I know there's two things people resist most, and that's change and the unknown, you know, and so, you know, that's what we're bringing to them, you know, the knowledge of the past and the unknown and change, you know, that once you have this knowledge, you know, you have to change. And most people want to just stay in their comfort zone, but that comfort zone's unsustainable. And there's going to be a major backlash to continuing business as usual. So I always say resistance is futile. You know, it's not optional. We are going to have to rise to the occasion. And if we don't, you know, there's going to be a backlash that I don't want to think we all want to be a part of that. And we're seeing that right now. The backlash is manifesting right now. And I think it's in a way that's just kind of forcing more people to reevaluate their lives and their belief systems and where they want to go, you know, in the future. And I love that picture of you on your Skype here, where on your bio, where you're standing out in nature, because that's where I spend most of my time, and that's where the real wisdom comes. Yes. And, you know, one of the lamas I studied with, I asked him, I said, you know, what's the most powerful thing you can do, the most powerful meditation you can do? And he says, just get out in nature and shut up, you know? Yeah. He said,
we become so unbalanced. Like you were saying, we become so unbalanced. We're being bombarded by wireless signals and TVs and radios. There's so many signals bombarding our system, and we're basically electric beings that have mostly a composure that's made of water. So it's just electricity that's being bombarded by all these stimulations that are causing us to be very unbalanced. We are organic computers that are full of viruses, and the only way to break those viruses, the only effective means to destroy these viruses is to get out to a place where you can harmonize with this neutral energy. It's a positive energy of the earth, but it's neutral in terms of bringing someone back to the beginning, bringing someone back to before they became unbalanced, so that they can then build upon this balanced state where they then look back at what they've been a part of, you know, staring at reality TV shows and throwing down all these foods that are full of artificial colors and flavorings and these things that are genetically modified that affect us on a genetic level. All these things, water, like you said, all these things that affect us to keep us in a lower state of consciousness so that we won't be able to perceive the truth of what's around us. That's where nature comes in. I'm not saying that everyone has to, people used to call me nature boy in school. And I look back and I'm saying to myself, more of you should have been like that too, because you wouldn't have probably been quite as unbalanced as they got. And to me, that was one of the things that when I was going through the transition of learning the truth and going down the road of understanding, there's a lot of darkness to get through. There's a lot of bad things that have happened here. So if you don't have something to fall back on, this understanding of this harmony and synchronization that exists in nature, then you're going to become even potentially further unbalanced, because we need this moral base to fall back on, to then go from, to understand when I'm out in nature, if you're in a primitive, that picture you were just talking about, that's more than 3 miles from the nearest road. That's that's not even near a trail. That actually was a bushwhack. It's quite an adventure to get in there. But in a place like that, you sit, you don't hear any cars or planes. There's nothing. You're just sitting in complete bliss with just the energy of the earth. And when you're in those states, you first don't talk, you listen, and then you learn. You then let your own higher state guide you and take it where it needs to go. I've had some of the most profound experiences of my life doing certain meditations, and all of a sudden something strange occurs where it's like you're being talked to or connected by something that's much higher than you are.
Yeah, I agree. I do that too. I spend a lot of time, and I found out that the higher conscious energy, or that bliss you're talking about, actually activates your DNA. And we have the DNA of the gods, and and it's not junk DNA. It's actually just inactive DNA. And once we start activating that DNA, all the other gifts start opening up, which is a whole nother show in itself. But unfortunately, we're out of time right now. I'll have to get you back on again, because I'd like to go further into this and cover some more information on this. But it's been awesome having you on the show, and we got to get you out to the ranch here, to become a speaker and do some workshops out here as well.
Well, thank you so much. It's been great to be on here with you. I hope people can check out, I have a website called thestageoftime.com, and I'm just getting ready to release the newest book called The Stage of Time, early 2019. I'm hoping either end of winter or spring. But also, along with your channel, I have a channel that you can find at Matthew LaCroix. We just, like you and I both just try to put out as much as we can information and wisdom so that others can, not just blindly listen, but to then go do the research themselves, to then verify, so that they can understand why we're doing this, why we're putting our energy forth towards change. So thanks so much. It's been really great talking to you. I really appreciate it, James.
Yeah, you too as well. Keep up the great work, and we'll be talking to you soon.
Okay, thanks so much.
All right, we're out of time, unfortunately, folks. A lot of information there, and I'm really hoping we can get some more of that out real soon. But it's James Gilliland with As You Wish Talk Radio, signing off. Have a great evening. Stay in the heart. Watch the skies. Your ancestors are returning. Good night.